Hello, this is Lynn Fraser with the Radical Recovery Summit. When I first interviewed Akilah S. Richards 3 years ago, there wasn't perhaps an obvious link between trauma healing, addiction, and recovery, and the work that she was doing around decolonizing children's minds, fair of the free child. And yet there's a deep thread that runs through that. In this talk that I had with her, we explored some of the non-linear ways to connect, some of the deeper work that she's doing around grief. I really enjoy Akilah's warmth and depth, her honesty, and I'm sure you will too. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm so happy that you're here and that we can talk.
My pleasure. My pleasure. As I think I said last time, it is such an honor. I find it really interesting and interesting in the way that it's worth following, just the different intersections of healing work and discovery work and the work of unraveling and the work of grief and all these other things. So I feel like just like last time, we meet each other in a really interesting and aligned space. So I'm really grateful for the invitation. It was an easy yes.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I rejoined Rooted Community
Yes.
so that I could be part of your work there this fall.
Oh, that's so awesome, Lynn.
It's beautiful what you're doing. So when we met last time, we talked about the whole of your work around freeing children, fair of the free child. We talked about deschooling and schoolishness and all of the deprogramming that you do. And
Yeah.
now you're doing something a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so can you kind of bring us up to date? How did you get from the work that you were doing with your children to what you're doing now?
hmm Yeah, it's so interesting. So at this moment, I completed 1 year of seminary, an interfaith, interspiritual seminary, and then transitioned into thanatology school. And thanatology is a word I'd never heard before seminary, and it's the study of death and dying. So death doulas, death midwives, which are different things as I know now, and really just the work of tending to grief and loss in its various stages. And to me, Lynn, that isn't much different than raising free people in terms of, Fear of the Free Child was the podcast that eventually gave me the language of raising free people because that's what it was about, including the self, and including not it's outside of parenting. It includes parenting, but it goes so much beyond that. And where it led me to was grief. That so much of what the families that have invited me to walk with them through something, so much of the work, my own personal work as Akilah and also as Marley and Sage's mother, and also working with other people in various capacities, whether I'm doing a talk or we just met on the street or I'm facilitating a workshop, whatever. So much of the work ends up being about grief. I raised this type of kid, or I was supposed to raise this type of kid, but they're different somehow, whether what they're interested in, how they identify, all these other things. And so now there's a little d death. It's not a death of a human body, but it's a death of an idea of a particular thing, something you were going to work through this thing. So much of it is grief tending. So, and a part of grief work happens so slow. Like you can't, all right, on Wednesday, I'll grieve for 22 minutes, right? um, it's slow. So it really led me to recognize the ways that so much of my own liberation work as a mother, as a Black woman, had to do with having the space to go slower, to not produce, do, be, but to slow down. And so much of the slowing down was not about what I get to do, is what I get to grieve. So that's how they're connected. And I started seminary because I finally found an interfaith, interspiritual seminary, because a lot of the ones I'd been interested since college, since the late 90s,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because of my own unraveling from growing up in a devout Christian Seventh-day Adventist household, raised by my grandmother for a big chunk of time, and then moving to the US and carrying a lot of that with me. And then through my early and mid 20s, really being able to um, distinguish between what I was in and what I was told, and then my own relationship with God, with spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally got to a point where I felt like I had the space a little bit financially, and also the age of my children where I could go in, of course, I found a space. And really, I'm still discovering the connections to my work, and they're so like delicious and interesting, because it is really a lot about grief tending, and a lot of it is my personal healing work, getting to be with things that I was just not in a position to hold, notice, release, wrestle with. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When I think back to when my child was young, he's 50 now.
Grown.
I was also really not a grown up. I had him when I was 20, and I had a lot of trauma in my teen years. And I just really wasn't the way I would parent now. I wasn't
Yeah.
able to do that then. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so
Yeah.
many of us have that experience about how we were mothered or fathered or not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so for me, the what I keep saying is that I will forever be an unschooler. Unschooling was my big portal. That's where it was like, oh my God, detached from the matrix. Like that's when I got to see things. And now it, those skills are embodied. And so now I really want to be able to show up, not about how will they learn math. I couldn't care less,
Mm-hmm.
frankly, about that anymore, because now I'm really invested in intergenerationality beyond a school-centric life, right? Which is so much about our own personal leadership work, and how grief and loss and fear and shoulda woulda affect power, and how power then affects us across generations, and our perception of what we need to do to hold power, and what happens when we unravel and the power is not, we don't have the thing that we thought was going to make us powerful, like the really smart kid or the particular relationship, and there's nothing to put in its place. So now here we are. um, And for me, what has shown up is this word around savoring. I've been calling myself a savorist, as you might know through Rooted, because for me, the art of savoring is about being able to, it's three parts. It's to acknowledge harm. Like when I call it a savor complex, like a thing you invoke, like putting on a cast. It's a short-term thing that I recognize my own story of going from a school-centric mother to a partner to my children, and a member of community that doesn't see myself only as a warrior and a survivor. Um, so much of that is about being able to acknowledge where harm was or is, to just acknowledge it, right? To detangle or deschool, like to detach myself from it. I am not the harm. The harm is happening. And here I am, even if I'm causing it, because it's not just about harm that's happening to me. So it's to acknowledge harm, to see myself as separate from it, to kind of deschool the idea that it's happening to you because you weren't good enough, fast enough, strong enough, smart enough, whatever. And then that third part, then once I've acknowledged the harm, allowed myself to do a little bit of detangling and deschooling, then the next one is about connection. I can establish connections that are going to move me into a healthier space, and or I can notice connections that have been there. I just was not in a position to, yeah. So
Mm.
so that's what savoring has been for me this invocation of that acknowledging the detangling and then being in relationship to connection and letting those things continue to shape my relationships and my willingness.
Wow. Yeah, that's such deep work. So when you talk about grief, um, I get that. And I also imagine that there's a lot of joy there as you're doing this intergenerational liberation work.
Absolutely, because that's a part of what I'm learning, emphasis on the ing, just learning how much untended grief, how rampant that is, and how that looks like so many different things, and the relationship between guilt and grief, for example, and how much how much of our relationship capacity um, can be freed, and that we can experience joy when we are not ignoring grief, or when we're trying to fix it, or fill a gap, when we really just need the skills for living with a big old gap and letting that be the thing. My kid is in a space where I feel scared to say boy or girl because I'm not sure of this thing. And so I'm going to do all the research to try to figure it out. And then I say something in a room and they're like, oh my God, that's the worst thing you could ever say. Right. And then that can happen not with a kid, as we're doing all of this work around belonging and inclusion and all and equity work. There's so much messiness, but we're all schoolish and we don't know how to be with that. We know how to show up when we have it right and when we can say the right words. And so I've been able to work in a lot of different organizations since the last time we've talked, corporations, higher ed, but since my book came out, a lot of invitations into schools of social work and working with strategic planning firms and bringing unschooling skills and mindsets, reminding people that, for example, their favorite song, there's a place for that in a conversation at your job. There's a space to create a cookbook together on the weekends, and it actually can allow for a different experience together when you're producing, when you are allowed to be more human in a space. And so that joy comes on the other side of the grief of, oh, I'm not going to show up like the perfect person. They know that I forgot to do whatever today. Yeah, but if we had a different relationship to that than shame or guilt, how differently might we show up? What is available in that space? Um, yeah, where we don't tuck it in for the weekend or the therapy session. Yeah.
One of the terms you used is unflattening people. That is so profound. Bring this little bit of us for lots of different reasons. Partly it's fear, partly it's I don't know for sure if I'm going to say the right thing. So can you talk a little bit more about that by
Yeah.
unflattening? And what are some of the
And I love
components
that
of
you
that?
heard that. Yes. So that came from, so there's this suite, SUITE, of tools and toys, as I think Resma Menachem is where I've heard that term of tools and toys, um, that I still call accelerated intimacy, AI, like the other AI. And it's this idea that when we walk into the room, my paper doll is in another room, but we're flat. We're this one thing. Hi, I'm Dr. Such and Such. Hi, I'm Lynn Frazier. I have these accolades. Hey,
Yeah.
it's like this. But these tools and toys are meant to show us that if we open up a paper doll chain, there are all these different aspects. So this same person who has this doctorate and who's in this executive leadership position also has a dog named Peter. And it's actually his fourth dog named Peter, because ever since he was 7, and you've named your pet the same. It's like, or you like that particular Stevie Wonder song the way that I do. We do things like watching each other enjoy our favorite song or sharing a thing like that. And just ways that there's so many things, that decisions we make about people because of what we know about them or what we think we know. But sometimes what we don't know about someone can actually soften our willingness or allow us to offer appropriate grace, or to be able to release the expectation that they're going to show up a certain way because of something as simple as what food combination they like that you like, that people think is super weird, and you stand for chunky peanut butter all day no matter what, and only one other person in the room does too. They seem like little insignificant things, but they're not. They open up the scope of the human, because so much of decoloniality, in addition to land back for Indigenous people, as we expand that, includes the ways that that colonized mindset tries to make us put people in these specific boxes of understanding, and we're quickly trying to figure out who they are and whether or not we can trust them. Whereas if we open up that doll chain, there's so many aspects that we can move in and out of and allow for, and not necessarily agree with or like or understand, but have the skill to be with. Like how can we be more of ourselves together in these times when there is already a flattening of understanding of people, and a willingness to come together a little messily, a little bit more than usual. The gatekeepers are really going away, and we're finding the need to rehumanize our relationships. And to me, these accelerated intimacy tools, like the ones that I'm using and playing within Rooted, like treaty writing, like the one we're going to do with the tea ritual. I call that Raising Tea People, TEA, because it's an acronym. But it's just, Lynn, these ways of saying, there's so much I don't know about you. There's so much I don't know about you. You annoy me when you do this thing, and that's real and that's legit, and I stand on that. And we are here in this thing together, producing and doing. What ways can we drop a little bit more into who we were even before we got to this job? And how might that impact how we relate, which then impacts how we produce? And to be messy together, and not so much, again, this tucked in, yeah, I'm here.
So
Yeah.
when you're working in a corporate setting, it's a high risk situation to be yourself. What are you finding when you're working with people in that situation?
I am finding that people crave connection, that humans, so many of us, our drivers are 7, 8, 9 years old. The driver wants to be acknowledged and liked and seen and heard. And I'm finding that people are not as resistant to that as I would have thought. I'm finding that people are, the resistance is more like, how is this gonna look to my supervisor? Or how is this gonna look to the people that I supervise? Not so much the thing itself. Yeah, that's what I'm finding. I'm also really curious about how I walk into some of those spaces with a type of armor. I think like I'm gonna have to break through, and I'm gonna have to, and I often leave with that same thing fully intact. I didn't have to pull that out. People are delighted about telling the games that they played before they turned 10. And people are chatting in the thing about, I can't believe they have that too in Mississippi. I thought they only had that in Jamaica, and it's called this. And, and remember when we did this thing, maybe we should do more of that. It's like people are waiting to pick that up and move with that. And people have language for the fears that they have. And of course, there's also the ones where it's like, what does that have to do with anything? So, but that's not what's the norm. That's not what I've been finding mostly.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it absolutely surprises me in a beautiful way, and it just reminds me, yeah, I continue to need to honor being a student, and to walk into a space as open as I can, and with many of my, paper doll chains open as I can, because my biases live, they live, and they can easily thrive. And, that's what I'm also continuing to see in this space. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about decolonizing education, decolonizing our workplace, land back, those are some radical ideas. I don't imagine that they're well understood in some situations, but I get the sense that what you're saying is deep down, we all kind of get that.
Exactly, whether we use that languaging or not, because we're also steeped in the effects of a settler colonial ecology, like what that means in terms of how we need to be and show up, and what safety means, and what production means, and what connection means. So we've all experienced versions of it, and again, I think it's Angela Davis that reminded us, if I'm not mistaken, about radical just meaning, grabbing, returning to the root of a thing.
Right.
That's really what that means. So for the root for most humans is about connection and safety, and that we recognize our wounds that come from, no one escapes childhood unscathed.
Right.
um, and
Yeah.
that child is also often the driver of the actions we take. And so the just giving it a little bit of light, which is what the language around decoloniality often does, is to say, there's a reason that even though you've gone along with this thing, a part of you is like, yeah, but, and there's a reason why this thing, even though you do this, there's also that. I find that people get that. People end up saying, yeah, when I had my first kid at this age, like that's more so the conversation, because it is such a base level thing to want to feel a sense of belonging and to participate in that, and to acknowledge where you don't know, and that it's not your fault. There's a systemic component, and that you can then, with the recognition of that and some languaging and practice and some community around that, you might not be able to move and vote in a way that allows the land that you live on to be returned to the stewards, that the original stewards. That feels insurmountable. But if you can be in a different relationship with the people around you, because now you're aware of that mindset, and now you don't have to figure out as much, because you actually are learning to become a better listener and less defensive, because you're in practice, then you are shifting the system by not being complicit in the same ways. So if you move in different, you attract in different, you practice in different, and that idea of small is all, then you're gonna pollinate other circles. You're gonna, so any means necessary, right?
Right.
So we're not gonna discount that, and we're also not gonna make someone else wrong for buying into other things that feel like liberation work, that, what I'm saying? So it allows for that expansiveness of that approach to decoloniality. We march in, we vote in, where for some of us, and then for others of us, I'm in a different relation. Can we talk? Because when you said such and such, I didn't understand, and it felt like this. So then now, as a result of that, I'm not seeing you as this way. I recognize what I'm doing here and why I was defensive, and how that's rooted in this thing. And now we can have a conversation that isn't just like, how could you? It's like, actually, I get it. But now that we have that awareness, I wonder what we can do together from here. It's not, that doesn't feel as mighty and out of your hands as voting in the right person, which can feel futile.
Right.
Yeah.
Important and futile.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So it's to really take personal what you want to see out there. Like, what does it look like right in here, in you, right around you? Because that's another part of the thing. We pretend, we show up and we front like it's all is well. And we try to sell a thing we don't even use. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When you decided to take your children out of the school system, and I admire that so much, and I think I would have longed for the kind of being seen that I sense your children experienced, and working with them as human beings who have their own personalities and intelligence and goofiness and all of the different things that human beings have, and then to be able to actually to be so seen and honored for who they are is such a gift. Do you feel like that you gave yourself that gift at the same time?
100%. 100%. Myself, my work with my mother, we had a rough go for many years, and this work, and she says the same thing, this work has shifted our capacity to see each other. And of course, the podcast, which ran for 8 years, I just ended it this year, almost 300 episodes of different people's stories, of how hearing other people's stories like mine, not just mine, how they lived into certain things, the level of permission that offers, or even seeing now the girls are 19 and 17. And seeing how they approach school as they both are in by their choice on their terms, and me as a seminary student learning from that, how when I'm fussing with my dean about what I'm not going to do, and Sage is like, why are you even putting that part in their hands? Like, what is this actually about? She just peeked in, she heard her name. And it's like, oh my God, I never thought about that. I was just going to be pissed off and have an attitude. And it's like, why? So this idea of them having the space to really practice and develop confident autonomy, I learn from them all the time. And I say that I cheat off their paper all the time. I'm like, oh, is that how you do that? Because because it is absolutely and continues to be a gift for me. And I don't want to romanticize this thing. Like, it doesn't, you still are parenting and you still are with other humans. Like, certain things will happen and you have your life lessons. But one of the big things is that I trust their ecology. I am not their leader. It's not all on me and Chris to make sure these 19 things. We certainly have our list of things, and especially the age they are now. I'm like, oh my God, do you know how to, there's that still exists. But I get to watch them. My friend Malika calls it microdosing adulthood. I get to watch them microdosing adulthood and feel so confident in their capacity to manage themselves, because I'm like, not only would I not have had it in me to do that at your age, I'm just getting it now. I'm almost 50. So and also the type of grace and space they offer to their schooled friends, because they also can see so clearly some of the cost of your studenthood over personhood.
Right.
And how they're able to use that type of emotional intelligence and the benefits of the privilege of this type of grace and space in service of their friend groups and their one-on-ones. That is a constant education for me, even the messy bits, because then I also get to see how they trust me and their dad as a result of the years of that type of foundation, as opposed to shutting us out completely, or not trusting that we are actually thinking about them and not just our perception of them or how it might look to other adults. And You know what I'm saying? Like all of that gets mixed into how we relate and how we be together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how do you think, I know this is probably too big of a question, but what's your sense of how they see the world as 17 and 19 years old and having been through this process with you of not being in the school system? Are they
Ah,
typical? They're probably not typical for other teens.
mm-mm, no. Um, yeah, I don't know. That is a huge question. I pause, I hesitate to try to create any sort of picture of how I think they view things. Because to me, such a big part of mother work is the absolute acceptance of not being in control and also not being sure, not being clear. I've been saying lately, clarity for me is a trap,
Mm,
because because the more if I'm clear, then I'm kind of like, okay, got it. Wait, that doesn't fit into my clarity box. What is, you
right.
know?
Yes.
So what I can speak to, what I do feel comfortable enough, safe enough to speak to, is how I see them, like what they struggle with, and how they approach those sort of things. It's so expansive. Like they just have so many tools that are readily available, and whereas for me it's like the work that I feel I need to do to not just react,
Mhm.
and watching how they just seem to be so skilled at responding, and even naming when they are in the middle of a reaction and why. Those are the things that I look at that I'm like, mm-hmm,
Mm.
yes, she got it, she got it, she got it, she got it. Because I'm learning so much from how they approach things. It's like newer to me. So that's a lot of what I'm paying attention to. And again, the grace and space that they offer me and like people of my generation and even older, because they have a different type of understanding of our normalized trauma, which is the languaging that they used with me for years. Mom, you grew up with like normalized trauma. So of course you're gonna think this, and this. And it's like,
Mm.
so true. Of course I'm
And for
gonna
them
try
to
to
see
make it.
that,
Exactly.
yeah.
The like one big thing is the way that I grew up with this sense of like, if you can't make it make sense to me, then it just clearly it doesn't make sense.
Uh,
That's wild to me now. That's like the so ridiculously violent,
right.
right? And I draw this comparison oftentimes with like white saviorism and parent saviorism, because they live in this. I did that in the last rooted session to talk about how those things feel similar, and how, as I was called in to do more work around belonging, and equity over the past few years, really seeing how so much of the power over dynamic that we question in self-directed education also lives in this myth of white supremacy, and how that lives not just in like the white robes, but in the regular everyday conversation, because of that same principle of like, if I don't understand it, it needs to stop.
Right.
Right, there's a thread of that. It runs through so many different things. And so a part of my work as a translator in that space is to translate some of those unschooling skills in relation to other types of power dynamics, other types of inherent hierarchy, because hierarchy itself is not always a problem. It's the defaulting to it and the expectations of what happens within that hierarchy, and to allow for the for inquiry around that is one of the ways that we get to the humanizing, the decoloniality, the allowing for not just trying to find the sameness and be like, yeah, see, we're all one. No, the differences are important. And the more we learn not just to celebrate them, but to honor that we won't necessarily fully understand it and that that's actually fine, then in the acceptance of that, in the practice of that acceptance, emerges other ways of being and doing that we could not have planned or whatever. And so that's what I see with the girls and other people who have been raised with more of a sense of liberation work, not just free to do whatever they want to do, because that's not the same thing as I think we talked about the last time. Unschooling does not mean your kid gets to do whatever they want. It's liberation and healing work, which on the other side of freedom is responsibility. So if your freedom is encroaching upon someone else's, that ain't it. Just keep going. Yeah.
So some of those skills you talked about deschooling or unschooling skills, what are some of those?
Those are some of the ones that I really tried to put into this accelerated intimacy suite. So let me give you an example of one. There's this practice called photobomb, BALM. And you take a picture, like, so you have this picture of yours and it's a picture that's really important to you, and you take the photo and you stand up in a room if it's in a physical space, and you don't show it to anyone, you describe the photo. And the first time you describe the photo, you describe it kind of technically: black and white shirt, woman, hair cut in a bob, flowers behind her, brown wall, picture, that sort of thing. And then you explain it again. This is a shirt that actually my best friend bought me 10 years ago. And every time I actually wear it when I'm having a bad day and need to show up and do stuff because it makes me feel so wonderful. And this picture is a blah, blah, blah. Like you explain it both ways. And in between that, you show the picture, you share it. And the difference between what happens in the body when they're describing it differently. So you just get to witness someone have a very different experience with a piece of plastic and paper. And I cannot tell you how that seemingly trivial almost thing brought up so many deeply personal, sometimes even spiritual experiences with perception and conveyance, like being able to convey what we convey and what we perceive, and what happens when we don't feel like we can convey what we want to convey or people aren't seeing. So it's just these, and for me, that lives in the unschooling perception of like, if I can't tell that you're learning, then obviously you're not learning, because if you knew it, then you should be able to tell me when it's like, oh, I stared at this paper for this amount of time. I cannot tell you how to answer these things. But then I went on to, like, I don't know, do some investigation about different types of paper. And then I started drawing this particular type of thing. And then it took me back to the history of this thing. So now I'm researching this group of people here. Now I'm off in a completely different space altogether. And to you, it looks like I'm just staring at stupid videos on the computer. And it may not mean that I go into this line of business or whatever the hell, but I'm so... education is happening, learning is happening, and the proof of it is not necessarily living in my capacity to show it to you, but you can become more skilled at understanding the different ways that learning works, seen and unseen, which then means you're less of a problem to the person because you don't understand whether or not they're learning. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's an example of translating that type of skill into a different space. So then we move into a whole conversation about perception and about how the eloquent person in the room gets all the check marks and the attention because schoolishness says articulation and eloquence is what gets attention. It deserves it. You did it. When for some of us, it's almost kind of built in. Like, I don't know why I'm good at talking and spelling and writing stuff. That means that there's this assumption that I'm smarter than somebody else who isn't good at these particular things. And that's absurd. And when we recognize that in a room, there's a tenderness because some people in the room are that. They've just been waiting to hear someone say that. not so that they can go on and talk to us about it, but just so they can feel a little bit more safe in that room, which then impacts how they show up, how they receive, how they move into the next room. Right. So these kind of things that school calls soft skills or subtle skills, was like, they ain't even that subtle because they directly impact how we relate.
For sure. And there's so much shame that people carry for not fitting in and not being part of that valued crowd, the ones who
Exactly, Lynn. And there's also so much pressure in the instances that you are, when you are that, to be that, to show up like that at all times, at all costs. And for some of us, we internalize that. And it's like, I don't get to be wrong or sad or whatever because I'm the strong one, I'm the smart one. And that's also a type of violence, and hurt people. And often we don't even know that we're doing that because it's like, what do you mean? I'm smart and I'm saying, if you need to be seen, then you need to speak up. How am I supposed to know what you want if you don't say it? And if you don't say it in this exact way so that I am inspired, and because leaders are supposed to be inspiring and this and that. It's like, mm, mm, no. So then you want the leader to be the end all be all, but then you're also saying that you want to have more of a voice in the space. And then that's the leader's fault because hierarchy says the person on top is the smartest, brightest. So if we're not looking at it like that, then how can we take that leader off the pedestal so that now they're not feeling guarded and afraid to make a mistake because we are learning how to unravel a little bit more together, which is so much of what unschooling is. It's unraveling. It's unraveling and becoming skilled at trusting that the unraveling is actually vital to the spaciousness that is needed for the emergence of something that is rooted in what is actually aligned for the people involved, not what we thought before they got here and plug them into.
Mm-hmm. It's so true that we can trust that. If we think about, the stillness in the mind, the stillness is always in the mind. It's just there's a lot of chatter there too.
Yes.
And then we get distracted or we go into a shame response or go into a fight response or we disconnect.
Yes.
And then we forget that stillness is always here.
It is always there. Exactly. We have access. We have access. And so much of for me, this savor complex work is about that, like being able to access what I believe is in us, and not only me being able to access it for myself, because nature always needs other nature. So to be able to be in spaces where I am seen enough, heard enough, trusted enough that I can show up in level 9 unraveling, and someone in the space is grounded and rooted, so that then, as we know, those things, those cues, as I'm learning this in thanatology school, you walk into a room with a groundedness, you also are holding that grief in a way that another human might need you to in that moment, just like you will need that at some point. There's so much in these movements now that are talking about how self-care and community care, like all these things that we keep pushing self-care on people, when it's like, actually, what you're talking about, what's needed here is community care. Sometimes before we can even get to that. Because if I'm on fire and you're telling me to take a freaking bubble bath, I can't get to it. I can't get there. I can't be still. But I can be in community where someone has developed the skill to drop into a thing that I can cheat off their paper and tap into my thing and just watch Lynn on the app and listen to Lynn on the app for 15 minutes because I am not gathered today in that way. So I'm going to call in other nature in this moment. That too is a skill.
Mm-hmm.
So in unschooling, I don't have to have and be all the things, but I can understand that my capacity also includes the calling in, the reliance upon, the co in the thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And if the way we made it to here is to be tough and to not need anyone else, there's a lot that has to be let go of and unraveled.
Yeah, and we can't do it alone. So
Yeah.
much to let go of, to even recognize, like how my friend Hill says, you can't see your own eyebrows. You can't, you just can't, no matter how you try, not without that mirror. And that's what other nature, be that people, plants, all the different ways that we can come back to what we need, come back to be able to draw on what we need, which is not always it's always within us, but the access to that is sometimes a collective effort.
Mm-hmm. We need that kindness and connection with other people. Yeah.
We do, and we need to feel safe enough to allow it. Boy, do I know that struggle, right? Like, as you said, what got us here becomes the thing that we rely on. My partner Chris and I were just talking about that this morning. It's like, there's a way where it's like, okay, whatever happened, maybe it was supposed to, and what, at the end of the day, here we are, right? Here I am on the other side of the thing, but who is that I? And what does that I want from where I am now? Not what got me here, but right now, what capacity, what skills, how am I safer now than I was then when I developed that thing back then to keep me safe in that environment that I'm not even in anymore?
Right.
But I'm carrying it around. And I don't know if it's because I'm studying death and dying, but I've been visualizing it like a body. Like when I'm especially when I'm angry, I'm imagining it like a body I'm dragging around, like a body, not just like a body that is decomposing. So I have to now tend to this thing. I got to find a place to bury the foot. I got to mask the smell. So if I just didn't drag it around, what would I be? And I know it's probably like creepy, but that's what I need. Like I need that sort of that level to be able to tap
I get that.
into. Because I get stuck and I go, 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 go. I go, Lynn, especially if I'm in this space in between anger and sadness, which is where a lot of my grief work has been living lately, stuck in between anger and sadness. And they're both so aggressive and they both have so much to say to everybody and to me. And it's like, okay, let the body go, let it go. If I let it go, what do I have that I can tap into, not to fix it, but also to not look away in this moment? Uh, those are the sort of things that I find helpful in trying to be the type of thing that I want to see and that I need. Yeah.
Right. Wow. So one thing that I find very inspiring about younger people, and sometimes it happens in older ones too, but if we look at something like gender identity and beyond the binary of male,
Mm-hmm.
female, beyond the binary of I'm straight, I'm gay, beyond all of those binaries, it's exciting to me to think that the conditioning that says you have to be on a binary is really breaking down quite quickly.
Yes, it is, right? Quite quickly and not fast enough at the same time. Yeah, yeah. And I do feel like that's connected to my experience, I should say, is that lives and thrives in younger people for sure. Like to the point that I love sometimes the ways that some young people will look with a type of look like that's absurd. Oh, so you really believe that? Like that to me is such an education. That sort of response, like I'll watch it, I'll see it, whether it's in my own home, directed specifically to me,
Right.
or whether I'm looking at it on the safety of my little phone screen.
Yeah.
Um, that sense of, for me, that charges me up where it's like, yeah, absolutely. I do want to have the experience of feeling like that is crazy that I thought that I could just make that decision and it would be fine. I need that because the part of me that is about control is so skilled. so muscular, you know what I mean? Like she's like, she, so she needs oftentimes that sort of like, hello, for, for me to be like, oh my God, I never even questioned that because that was so comfortable over here. You're right. I'm not entitled to that. Oh my God. So now I'm investigating all the other spaces in ways that I didn't even, not only did I not do it, I didn't even know those spaces existed. I didn't know there was any investigation to do. Again, I was clear. I was clear.
Right.
The clarity, emergent clarity is fine. It's the one that's just like built into the stuff, hammered in like, this is a girl, this is a boy. This
Right.
means this means that. You're this, which means you're that. Even with money, like all these different unravelings have happened around what wealth means and what people with money have and don't have and what they should do. And I find that this work leaves no stone unturned. And it is not, I say it's not for suckers. Like it's not, if you're just like, oh, I can't. It's it's because it is both a deeply personal thing, and it's a thing where you're gonna need other. You're gonna need other people, other things, other types of medicine um, to be able to heal. And the medicine is not always the one that tastes nice that you would choose, and it looks exactly like what you would think. The medicine is in the relationships and the feedback and how people respond or react when you show up in a certain way, not just people you care about, right? All of that. Yeah.
It's quite a journey to go from being conditioned into and not questioning it, and then seeing the condition and the colonization of our minds and the programming, and then to be able to go, okay, I can do something different to try these things. And it's really hard.
Yes,
And
it
it's
is.
also really exciting.
It
And there's so
is.
much there.
Yeah. I could not agree more. It is. And it's also so necessary. And for me, one of the major things that doing that many episodes and being in, just dropping into so many different forms of community, and that's a word that I don't take lightly. So I actually mean community and not just like groups of people together. What I've seen is that there are so many spaces where people are in practice of this way. There are many spaces where people are willing to, the language that I use is trust towards. Like we might not trust yet, but we're trusting towards something different, and we're allowing that to shape us. I find that I'm around a lot of spaces where that work is happening and that it doesn't feel super radical. It feels like, what else are we going to do? More of the same? Like we see the harm. What else are we going to do? And that so many of these practices are rooted in indigenous practice, native indigenous, Black indigenous history, the history of us before the industrial this and that, right? There are lots of ways of being together that the progress of cityfying the things has cost us, and that our bodies still remember how to do. And that little slivers of being in healthy, right relationship kind of unlock or release more of that, more of that. And that our young people have more and more voice, so they help to shape the spaces that we're in, so that we're not having to feel like we got to be so radical. It's like, if you could just like listen and pay attention and recognize that, like what your condition intends to cause you to do, and practice that, all of it is not so much of a heavy lift. Some of it is a relief. And the joy that you mentioned, it's like, oh my God, it's so much easier to not be the ruler of every freaking thing, actually. I actually want this. I actually needed this. I didn't know. I thought the thing was to control. I thought that was safe.
Yeah. And it's not. No.
And it cost me so much more than I even had the capacity to notice. I didn't make that connection before because I was in it. But now that I've made that connection, I'm building a little bridge from that version of me over to that other one. And because I'm in community, I don't have to make all the pieces by myself. We bridge working together, and it's messy, and it's necessarily messy. In Caribbean culture, carnivals, which is not just in Caribbean culture, but my experience, I talk about this thing that we have called Jouvert. It's a French word, Jouvert, and you're just rolling in the mud. It's messy, it's muddy, and that's a part of the celebration. It's gonna get in my eye, it's gonna get in my, but I'm in honor and reverence of the mess because it is a part of my right to get to then what we need. We have to get to this part where the music is fast and the people are this. It's like we are in a type of juvenile where it's like, just smear the mud on, baby. Don't worry about that. Like, get dirty, get
Right.
dirty. We're gonna watch each other react to the dirt. We're gonna, yeah.
Mm. Wow. So here we are, just about the end of our time together, Akilah. So, do you have any kind of final thoughts about just for people maybe who are too scared to let go of control?
Yeah.
You talk about gathering in all of these wonderful people as we let go of control. That happens. What would you say for people who are like, I don't know, I'm not sure if I'm ready for that?
Yeah, I would say that's a good sign. Like to not be sure, that's already a good sign because it leaves open the possibility. And that what I find really helpful is to really try to practice showing up as authentic as I can, like to look for me the performer in me from being the A student and the being really present with the performative me is such a portal to so much other work. So I would start there. Like if you, for example, if you know you're going to have this interview and you want to be perfect and you want to study the things and what can you not do? Sometimes we don't know what to do, but what can you not do? And then allow for your body and your psyche to have the experience of you not preparing for 45 minutes before the interview, maybe just 5, and then live that experience. And on the other side of it, gather a little bit more. Just continue to, where you can, notice the ways that you perform for fill in the blank and put yourself in a position to practice not, so that you can have the education of that experience, because that's its own type of fuel where it's like, oh my God, it was so good to be like, I don't know the answer to that. Actually, that's not a good question for me. Heart beating out of my chest. I didn't die. It actually felt good on the back end. Maybe 2 days later, maybe not that day or the next day, but 2 days later, not only did it feel good, it actually unlocked another place where I now want to practice it. Like you can trust toward that. You don't have to have this big, clear plan and description of what it might, or prescription of what it might look like. You can just poke at a few spaces. Hair is another big one for me, just doing a lot of different things with my hair, and practicing being however the hell I'm feeling. Oh my God, I should put a wig on because it'd be so much easier if I did. Huh, who is that for?
Right.
Where else am I actually trying to make somebody put a wig on when really it's this? Because now that I've felt it in my body, it's a little bit easier to notice it. So that's what I would say. Where can you just, nothing is small enough, nothing is too small for you to practice. If your
Yeah.
mom's going to come over and you tend to clean a little less, and don't come up with 14 reasons why you didn't. Let it live and let that sit for a few days, see what you learn. and do it again maybe the other holiday if you got to space it out, like
Right. Let
those
yourself
sort of
be a bit
things.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And allow your body to learn through that. Like allow yourself where you can to experience that, because that is an education. It's not always in the thinky think. You're not
Right.
always going to be able to plan it out, but your body can be such an ally in
Yeah.
being able again to acknowledge harm, right? To separate yourself from it and to then be in a different relationship with the connection. Oh, my mom isn't the problem. It's that I think this thing, or she is the problem. So therefore I can move this way. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of space there. Yeah.
A lot of space there, exactly. And we gonna need all of it. So
Right. Things are pretty hard right now. Things are intense.
they
Yeah.
are intense. That's why the grief work
Mm,
is so important. They are intense, and we're at a different level of the availability to really see, right? Because as people keep saying, it ain't different. It's just the veil isn't there in the same way. So now we are seeing it
yeah.
all around, and it's not as easy to look away or to stay in your little bubble. So we need these skills now, because it's not about sitting in the box and pretending anymore and then unraveling on the weekend with the things.
Right.
No, we got to figure that out together on an everyday basis. Yeah.
Doing the kind of work you're doing around death, that's so real and immediate. There's not a lot of wiggle room there when someone's in that dying process.
I'm finding that that too is there's so much decoloniality or potential for that, and even the experience around how we deal with it. I mean, it is so that would be a whole nother conversation. Even like the funeral industry, that's like another industrial complex of how
Right.
we care for a body and what doctors learn and how much they can treat the disease and not the human,
Mhm.
and what that means for how we as like non-medical people view death and dying, and how the process of death and dying is snatched away from us, just like education, in favor instead of school, or this very specific thing, throw as much money at the casket and the this and the that and that. But the grief, the things we can do to deal with the grief of the physical person not being there, where is the space for that?
Mm.
And what happens when we do get a little bit of that space? So then we're the type of conflict that tends to come with the loss of a human, so much of that can actually be addressed, as a lot of these deeply experienced death workers are teaching us. So much of that is avoidable through a different relationship to death and dying. And that's why I want to become so much more skilled and resourced and communitied up around that, because I want to be able to also translate some of those skills into the spaces where I'm brought in. I do a lot of one-on-one coaching these days. And I find that no matter what people come to me for, no matter what level, it's like it's a grief circle. It's actually, I'm in so many grief circles right now,
Mhm.
so many.
Mm.
And I'm grateful, and it's hard, but it's like, it led us to this. The thing is not whatever brought us in here actually brought us here to process the grief,
Right. Right. And to let ourselves feel it. Yeah.
which is a skill. It's not just a thing that you just choose how to do, like, you
Right.
know, like the girls always used to use that language with me. Mom, it's like, someone saying, oh, I'm depressed. Well, just don't be, just stop being. It's like, it's the equivalent of that. And they had to use that example so many times. If I'm like, oh my God, yes, I get what you're saying. After the 90th time. Yeah.
Our children can be that way for us. They can help us see things. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah.
How can people get a hold of you?
I'm on schoolishness.com. That's the space where, in addition to some of the tools and toys to put this into practice, I'm getting a little bit better at sharing there. And I also have a newsletter on Substack called the Savor Complex. And that's where I'm doing a lot of that work out loud. And then the last space, which came through the podcast, is Patreon, my Make It Happen family, I call it. It was initially to keep the podcast going. And now it is supporting me through moving through these different types of education and gathering. And a lot of the courses that I had on Teachable and all, I'm just doing those through Patreon. And no matter what level you come in, everyone gets the same thing, which is just our capacity to be together in these ways. So I would say certainly Substack, definitely Patreon. That's where I'm doing most of the real time work. And then schoolishness.com is where I have things you can read and watch and buy in connection to doing that personal leadership work and that allowing of the unraveling.
And you're open to working with new people as well for the one-to-one coaching?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. When folks reach out, it's set up in such a way that we kind of date first, because oftentimes people come kind of wanting a prescription, and it takes a session or two before it's like, actually, let me refer you to my friend who's a therapist, or let me refer you to somebody who's like really doing the parenting part, because I'm really on a particular type of thing around savoring. And I love that I have so many resources around me that I can refer easily without feeling like I need to hold, because there's a lane that there's a thing that I'm for, and I'm so much more aligned with what that is. So I say, if you hear or see something from me and it connects, reach out, because maybe we'll only do the one session, but I can often guide you. And with some others, we've been walking together for over a year, once a month, twice a month. And, the unraveling is allowing for what else is possible without rushing, because we're going to savor. I'm not going to help you build anything. We're going to really learn the skill of savoring and the things that come with that. So yeah, thanks for asking that question. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you again. It's been such a pleasure to meet and connect again. And I really value your work, and I'm really happy that we can get this out there for more people to see. The kind of deep work that you do is such an inspiration.
Thank you, Lynn.